Unit Webinar. This is the Bangladesh Country Report 2025, a deep dive into investment, industrialization, and the future of the FMCG sector. Panelist Mr. Shah Mohammad Mahboob, Mr. Dipesh Nag, and Professor Dr. Howard Nicholas. Moderated by Mr. Roshan Madawela.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nirikshani Mendis, and I'm the research economist at RI Unit. So, it's such a pleasure to welcome all of you to the launch of our Bangladesh Country Report 2025. We are truly glad to have such a diverse group of people with us today, all of whom share a deep interest in Bangladesh's fast-changing economic story. So, this report is something we have worked hard on. It brings together the real grounded insights to help the guided decisions for everyone investing in, working with, or simply exploring the opportunities in Bangladesh. So what you will see on this report is not just numbers, it's what's happening on the ground. So with that, I will be giving you a brief of our lineup for today. We will start with a quick walkthrough of the report, just to give you a feel for the key trends and takeaways. And then the next session, we will be like the second part of our session, it will be the panel discussion. So before we begin, just a quick note, the Bangladesh Country Report 2025 is now available for the purchase on our website. And since you have registered for the webinar and you are a part of our webinar, you will be receiving an exclusive voucher to access the report at a discounted rate. Thanks again for being here. We hope you find the session insightful and that it sparks even more interest in one of South Asia's most exciting and the dynamic markets. So let's get started. Over to you, Hoshin.
Thank you, Nirvadya. I'm Hoshin De Silva and I'm working as an economist at Research Intelligence Unit. So in this report, we cover the overall economic performance for Bangladesh with a special attention on industrialization and also the FMCG sector. Also, we'll be presenting you some of the findings from our analysis on the Chittagong port and its significance as well. So if we are to talk about the methodology of this report, we have gone through a rigorous desk review, a literature review, along with primary data. We have covered 200 plus urban retailers to get their feedback, and also we have done a private sector survey covering more than 100 business leaders and industry experts. And on top of that, to strengthen the quality of this report, we have also done 20 plus in-depth interviews. So that is the methodology of this report. So moving on, here you can see one example where we have measured the impact of political change that happened in Bangladesh in 2024. So what our findings show is majority of our experts, they believe that this to be a positive shift in Bangladesh economy in terms for business climate. And if you go further down, here we can see we have shed some light on changes into the disposable income by different income groups, and also the changes to the disposable income by different locations such as Dhaka and Chittagong. You can read more details about these things in our full report. And moving forward, you can see the changes into the next slide, please. Changes in the consumer spending by their income level. And if you look at the lowest income category, which is below 20,000 BDT, we can see in terms of their consumer spending, they have reduced consumption, they have relied more on borrowings, and they have been less prone to adopt side income. Because of all these reasons, only a very small percentage has actually had a a positive shift in their consumer expenditure. So likewise, in our report, you can see we have analyzed the behavior of all of these income categories in terms of their consumer expenditure, the disposable income, and other concepts, right? So we have also given a comprehensive overview of the economic position of Bangladesh. And here you can see a quick snapshot where you can see the real GDP growth has been positive, around 5.82%, which is a slight increase compared to 2023. And when it comes to per capita GDP, also we can see a slight increase in the per capita GDP. And when it comes to savings, the savings to GDP ratio also has increased a bit, and consumptions have gone down a bit, but this is favorable for investment climate. So likewise, moving forward, the next slide is also the continuation of the macroeconomic snapshot and a comprehensive discussion on the economic position of Bangladesh market. You can give it a read through a full report. So one of the important areas that we have added to this report is an economic forecast for Bangladesh for 2025 and also for 2026. So basically what the findings reveal is 2024 can be and is a bit tight year for Bangladesh given the recent events, but we can expect a positive change in the economic circumstances for Bangladesh in 2026. So it can be a favorable year for businesses in Bangladesh in 2026. So the analysis done by IMF, ADB, the World Bank, and even our own RI unit analysis show that the projected real GDP growth in Bangladesh will be ranging around 6 to 7% in 2026. In 2025, not that much, around 4 to 5%, according to our estimates. Likewise, you can see a comprehensive analysis, estimations, and projections of the economic variables for 2025 and 2026 in this report. Also, moving forward, we have included a significant another addition, cross-country analysis or comparison between Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. Because if you are not aware, Sri Lanka also underwent something very similar to the people's movement in Bangladesh in 2022. Where people stood against the Rajapaksa government, and Sri Lanka also underwent a series of conflicts and economic downfall and everything. So lessons from Sri Lanka can be attributed to some aspects in Bangladesh economic recovery as well. So what the findings suggest so far is 2026 will be favorable year to Bangladesh, and given the crisis severity is lesser in Bangladesh compared to Sri Lanka. Always there is a positive economic recovery expected in Bangladesh in 2026. So with that note, I would like to pass on the presentation to my colleague Nirwadya to shed some light on the FMCG sector and also the Chittagong port.
Thank you, Hashi. So with that note, we are going to shed our light on the Bangladesh FMCG market, right? So Bangladesh is moving fast. We all know that fact. And FMCG sector alone, they are projecting a revenue growth of 16% from 2022 to 2027. So do you know the big driver behind this expansion or this increase? It's about the rapid expansion of the middle and the affluent class. So we can say that was growing from 12 million in 2017 to 34 million by 2025, more than double. But it's not just about the more people spending, it's about how they are going to spend. They are mostly into the branded, health-focused, and the digitally influenced items. By 2030, Bangladesh is set to become the 9th largest consumer market globally, so that ahead of many developed countries today. So the opportunity is now. So then let's move into the FMCG market trends and the threats. FMCG sector remains resilient. As per our urban retailer survey data, essentials like dairy items, hygiene, and the nutrition items are still having a strong demand. However, there is a challenge. What is that? It's about the illicit flows and the counterfeits. Even the market leaders in the several sectors, they were seeing that their share is eroded by the unregulated players in the market. And we are also seeing that clear behavioral shifts. Urban consumers, especially in the Dhaka, they are opting for branded and the fortified goods. Rural consumers, they remain highly price sensitive. That's why mostly the small pack sizes are on the rise. All these data are revealed by our surveys, and you can have a in-depth look when you purchase our report. Health consciousness is no longer a niche, and even the middle income households are prioritizing the nutrition now. So the focus should not be on mass versus premium. It should be on adaptable, affordable, and the health forward products. Now let's turn into the Dhaka. So I'll consider Dhaka as the consumer market pulse, or else it's a consumption engine in the Bangladesh, or else Dhaka is the economic powerhouse. It contributes around 35% of the national GDP, and they have the highest concentration of middle income earners right now. Even under the inflationary pressures, Dhaka spending remains strong. So, but the problem, they are also having the problem of labor turnover, especially for the distributors, especially in the segments like logistic and the delivery. So solving these things requires a co-investment in systems that create the loyalty and the consistency, including the digital tools and the local hubs. So now we are moving towards the Chittagong port. So Chittagong port alone handles 90% of Bangladesh trade, and it's growing steadily. But this growth also highlights pressure points. Like when it comes to the port, they are having a shallow draft. It limited to 9.5 meters. So what is happening there? Because of that shallow draft, it restricts the large vessels incoming to the port. And congestion in port yards also has pushed away average dwell time to 11 days. That is considerable. And these issues need to be addressed clearly and systematically if Bangladesh wants to scale as a trade hub in the region. Now, my focus into the bunkering sector. So this sheds a rising opportunity. So bunkering is an emerging bright spot in Bangladesh. In 2023 alone, Bangladesh sold 250,000 metric tons of bunk fuel, and that is expected to double within the next 4 to 5 years. So especially the fuels like VLSFO and the MGO meet the international standards. And the specialty in the Bangladesh bunkering is that they are strictly enforcing the International Maritime Organization 2020 regulation. So that really build a trust among the global shipping lines, and that attracts them towards this. Having said that, most bunkering operations remain manual right now, and they are if we can adapt the technologies like mass flow meters and the digital tracking, Bangladesh has an untapped potential to improve their efficiency and to reduce their losses and to attract more and more international clients towards it. So last but not least, we are going to have a look on the infrastructure and the investment outlook. So Bangladesh is making big move on infrastructure with the support of the international countries and the international clients. So projects like the Bay Terminal and the Patenga Container Terminal, they are partnering with the DP World right now, and they are already in the progress. The Karnapuli Tunnel, it has improved the connectivity in between the port and the industrial source. Not only that, the off-dock terminals are also rapidly expanding right now, and the interest in joint ventures is also growing, especially in the segment of logistics and the bunkering. But the local partnership are a must due to regulations. So we can see that new systems like PMS and the port automation are coming up, and that make it faster when it comes to customs handling. The entire ecosystem is becoming more efficient, and that's a long-term advantage for the trade and investment in Bangladesh as well as in the global context. So if you want to know in depth of these things, you can check into our report. And then Yes, you can see like our report is already available on our website www.riunit.com. So as you are part of our webinar today, you will be receiving a 50% discount when you are purchasing this. You have to apply this promo code to grant us 50% discount. And then we will move into what I'm sure will be the highlight of today's session. That is our panel discussion, and it will be followed by a Q&A session. So if you have any question regarding our panel discussion, or if you have anything to be cleared up, you can put a message into our chat. And with that, I'm honored to introduce our panelists for today's discussion. Mr. Shah Mohammad Mahboob, Additional Secretary at BIDA, and Professor Howard Nicholas from Erasmus University, Netherlands, and Mr. Dipesh Nat, the Managing Director at Grameen Danone Foods, and our moderator or our CEO, Mr. Roshan Madawela, will be the moderator for our panel discussion today. Over to you, Mr. Roshan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nirvadya and Hoshin, for that introduction and a look at the report. I join you today from the Udugama Walawe in Matale in Sri Lanka with a lot of wildlife and nature behind me. We've told the birds to keep the noise down. I hope they will adhere to the request. And yeah, it's wonderful to have such a great panel today. With the mix of expertise that we have today, we hope to get a very interesting and balanced perspective on Bangladesh, past, present, and future. Let me start with a question for Mr. Mahboob regarding the path of industrialization that has taken place in Bangladesh, especially in the last decade or so. We have seen the manufacturing sector perform very healthily, in particular the ready-made garment sector. I think pharmaceuticals have also had a lot of government support, and maybe some of the IT industry. So what do you think the government has done right to get the manufacturing sector to grow what would appear to be very healthy growth rates? Over to you, Ms. Mahboob.
Thank you very much. First of all, I should thank our unit for publishing this report on Bangladesh. I think it presents very good numbers as well as good analysis on the present economic as well as industrial scenario of Bangladesh. Thank you very much. See, Bangladesh is a interesting country. As a Bangladeshi, I also feel that. I mean, it's not always what government did right. I think more of all, I should say that what the people did right. Because this is a small country, but with a large number of population. So it is always a struggle to feed a good number of people as well as to ensure their well-being. But I mean, the people who have done this analysis, this report, and you also, when you visit Dhaka or any city of Bangladesh, you will always see that, I mean, there is a sort of dynamism in its people. The person who is running an industry or the boy who is selling the peanuts in the street, everyone is dreaming for a better future. And everyone's target is to live better today than yesterday and plan for a better future than tomorrow. So I think that inspiration, that dynamism have kept this country alive. And same thing actually I can tell about this manufacturing industry. Manufacturing actually in Bangladesh, it has become a cross-cutting issue because like in many other countries, they focus on 3 or 4 sectors for investment or industrialization. But in Bangladesh, actually almost all the sectors are open for investment or business. Yeah, among all the sectors, this manufacturing part is very active. Like for example, you see the agriculture sector. There are of course some R&D, marketing, and other things. But agriculture processing, this manufacturing is a very big part. For RMG, it started as a clothing company, but then for backup industry, the textile industries has grown up. And FMCG, the big companies are here, also the local companies, they're also doing great. I think what we have, I mean, what the situation that have encouraged these industries or sectors to flourish is several factors. First of is markets. It is both a very dynamic domestic market as well as access to industrial markets. The report has already told that is the ninth largest consumer market. So if you consider the domestic market, it's already a lucrative one. It acts as a gateway to the South Asian or Asian regional market. Also, it has some preferential access to some good markets like US, Europe, and other things. So that is one aspect. The market is there. I mean, if you produce something, if you manufacture something, rest is assured that it will be sold and you will make a profit. I think the another reason is that here the production cost per unit is actually lower than the competitive countries. The productivity inputs, if I can tell specifically, like for example, the labor in Bangladesh, a monthly salary is $114, where the average is $366 in the peer countries. The land is 1.35 per square meter per year, the dollar, and where it is $6.92 in the average countries. So if you consider the productivity inputs, the cost is very lower. So when you produce something, you can produce in lower cost. I mean, we have done a survey among ourselves. We have seen that the FMCG units have done actually 60% return on equity, whereas the global sectoral average is 20%. That means for only the FMCG sectors, Bangladesh can give 3 times return than the global average. Also, there are some tax exemptions. I mean, you can import machineries without any import duty and other things. But as I have told that this access to market, the low productivity inputs, as well as high profit, and these 3 things actually have helped the industries or the sectors to grow. Thank you. I will stop here for now. We will contribute later if we can get the scope. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mahboob. You very interestingly touched on many aspects. I think particularly you mentioned the duties to encourage manufacturing growth and the people, something we would certainly vouch for. Our team that's engaged in Bangladesh find the people to be very industrious and warm and productive and intelligent. So I'm sure that plays a very significant part in the success story as well. So let me turn to Professor Howard, who has been very vocal and a strong advocate of industrialization for developing countries in particular as a way to reduce dependence and the volatilities and the vulnerabilities that come about when you don't have a strong industrial base. So what's your take, Howard, on the Bangladesh story so far and where we are now with industrialization?
Thank you, Roshan. Thank you, RI Unit, for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to be in this august group and to hear about Bangladesh, which leads me to confess something, and that is I'm not an expert on Bangladesh. I go around the world, as you have mentioned, talking about countries that actually I'm not an expert on. It's just an opinion that I have from reading a bit of information and data. And had it not been for your report, I wouldn't have dared say anything at all. I think the report contains a wealth of information, and it's really useful for investors as well as academics, I think. It's well focused and well structured, so my congratulations to those who put it together. It's a very useful resource. Now, in order to cover myself what I really want to do is to talk about, let's say, what I see happening in Bangladesh in the context of the lessons from Sri Lanka. And there I start with what the authorities need to worry about. And then I go on to what I think should be done with respect to those worries. So in a way, it's a very much broader thing than the microscopic details that your report gets into. But you do have also a whole section on the macro dimension. So in a way, I'm talking to that, but also talking to the section that you have in the report, which is lessons from Sri Lanka. I have three, actually I have four, but I can leave the fourth one for a bit later. I have three lessons that come straight out from the report, and doing a little bit of further investigation, these are the three that in a way worry me. The first one is the persistent trade deficit. And I think that is a concern that has to be dealt with. Now, as far as I can see, when I did a little bit more investigation, this deficit has been there for at least 25 years. It could be even longer than that, but I managed to get data for the last 25 years, and it's a consistent 5 to 6% of GDP trade deficit. Exactly what Sri Lanka had. And no matter how many times we warned about this, the authorities either negligently or intentionally ignored it. And they were able to do that because of a compensating factor, which is also there in Bangladesh, and that is the export of labor to foreign countries and therefore remittances. But actually, that's not a long-term solution. It's not a long-term solution. And it also doesn't help the country concerned. And we've said this many times in Sri Lanka, that it's a very tenuous and quite a precarious sort of existence. Now, that leads me to the second point. And there you can see the parallels also in Sri Lanka. The results have been three things. Three results. Firstly, relatively weak reserve situation. So reserves as a percentage of imports are not growing, and they haven't been growing for quite a long time. They're there, just allowing Bangladesh to manage, but not much more than that. So any shock that hits Bangladesh is going to result in some problems. And that, Sri Lanka had a much bigger shock than other developing countries, but we've seen that with COVID, that shock has sent everyone scurrying to the IMF for bailouts. The second thing is Bangladesh's currency has historically continuously depreciated against the dollar. The worrying aspect there is, like with Sri Lanka, the depreciation starts to accelerate because the trade deficit accelerates. So the depreciation, let's say 10 years ago, was about 4% annually. But over the last 10 years has jumped to about 6 to 7%. And that's not great news for a lot of foreign investors. You don't want the currency having an accelerated depreciation. But Sri Lanka had the same thing. And it again comes back to the trade deficit. The third thing is, and this is really the last 2 or 3 years, and this is what was the precursor to Sri Lanka's collapse, was a sudden sharp rise in foreign debt burden. I mean, it's literally vertical. And obviously, what happens is when you have a trade deficit which is not compensated by the foreign remittances, you have to borrow. There hasn't been a massive inflow of foreign direct investment, so Bangladesh has been left with no choice but to borrow. And you're borrowing in markets where interest rates are really starting to rise and rise rapidly. So this is not something that is good news. I mean, this is literally what we had told the Sri Lankan government for years and years and years, and they ignored it completely. The third major problem, and this is underlying everything, and that is the lack of industrial dynamism. Now, my son and I have done a lot of study of this, and what we can show quite conclusively is that no country in history, and I mean no country, ever had accelerated rise in per capita income without industrialization. And don't forget, now, after the West has been lecturing everybody, oh, you don't need to go down the industrialization path, this is not really necessary, why don't you do, in the case of Sri Lanka, tourism, so we keep being bombarded, no, do more tourism, etc., etc. Meanwhile, the West is resurrecting every type of industrial policy you can imagine, including massive tariffs and barriers against all developing country imports. So we know that it was hypocrisy that they were spouting when they said, no, you don't need industrialization. In fact, we do need it. And a very simple graph, you do any simple graph of Bangladesh's GDP growth and Bangladesh's industrial product growth, do a simple graph, and you can see a direct correlation. Now, the problem is this. Since 2017, industrial production growth has been falling. Okay, it's not precipitous, not like Sri Lanka, but it has been falling. I mean, last year's industrial production growth was half of what it was in 2018. And that's not good. And that is what explains the weakness in GDP growth. So GDP growth has been weakening. And that has been leading to all these other problems. Now, I'll leave the fourth point that I was going to make till later, but so what should be done? What should be done? The first thing is you need industrial transformation away from low value-added products. You need more technologically advanced production. Now, I'm a great believer in South Asia. I think in South Asia we have the capability. I mean, I meet young Sri Lankans all the time coming with new products for me. They're saying, can you help us get this product developed? We need just a little bit of seed capital, etc., etc. We've come back from Australia. I met 3 young engineers coming back to Sri Lanka from Australia because they'd rather live in Sri Lanka, much like Bangladeshis. I'm sure they'd much rather live in Bangladesh, but they need the support. They're very innovative, they're very entrepreneurial, and they just need that support. And this is the point, that no country ever developed without moving up the value-added chain. So we have a chart showing every single successful developing country moved up the value-added chain, and it was manifest in them starting to dominate medium and high-level technological exports. The recent case is Vietnam. Just see that chart of Vietnam, it's very clear. Second one, and this is where I get worried about this talk of creation of an innovation hub. We have it in Sri Lanka. At the moment, everybody is talking about IT and creation of an innovation hub. I want you to watch what China does. China is very far with AI, but China doesn't make a fetish of AI. All innovation has to feed into manufacturing, production. So if you look at AI in China and you look at how it is feeding into manufacturing, it's quite staggering. You know, it's not AI for the sake of AI. Now, the West wants developing countries to get into innovation, then they patent that innovation and take it from us. And what they do is they hire our scientists, you know. So we have paid to educate all these people. We are now paying for all the innovation to be done in our countries, and then they come and take it all. You know, what you need is that innovation to be feeding into your manufacturing. They don't want that. I assure you they don't want that, you know, because that is going to spell trouble for them, because then our goods are going to compete directly with their goods. But that is what Bangladesh has to do. Third thing, you have to diversify your export market away from the US and Europe. And in the case of Bangladesh, away from the UK, because that seems to be target. This is a legacy of colonialism. You know, you have to now look at the most dynamic parts of the world, and that is Southeast and East Asia. These are the parts of the world that are growing rapidly. You have to start targeting them. Because I assure you, while these countries are going to be reducing tariffs, look at China. The advanced countries will be raising tariffs. You know? Why? Because they can't compete. That's why. But the Southeast Asian and East Asian countries are reducing their tariffs, and they actually want these manufacturers that we're producing. So I would recommend strongly this diversification towards these markets and try and get rid of that colonial mindset that has been brought on us, where, you know, all roads lead to Europe and US and UK. No, they don't. The future is not there. The future is Asia, also South Asian, you know. But at the moment, the richest part of the planet is starting to become Southeast Asia and East Asia, and we've got to take a piece of that. And the Chinese have said they're willing to negotiate not zero tariffs for countries like Bangladesh, but pretty low tariffs. And that's where the deals need to be done. I told you I have this fourth point. I come to it later, Roshan, but in the interests of time, I leave it at that.
I counted about 15 points there, Howard. Saying 3 points, but amazing analysis, and you've obviously stepped back to give us that analysis, which is so lacking. So for much of the time, especially in the developing world in Asia, where practitioners and commentators are alike, sometimes, you know, we tend to be full on with the challenge of dealing with our daily tasks in the industry. But what you've done is helped us to understand where that fits in the larger picture of things and the bigger scheme of things. So thank you for that. I think massively valid. I was hoping to touch on geopolitics, so some of what you said will be relevant, and hopefully we can come back to that a bit later on. So let me move to Dipesh, and the question that I had wanted to ask you is going to be version 2 of that question now after what Howard said. So the first version is in what capacity and how has the FMCG sector helped in the process of industrialization in Bangladesh, given that you have a domestic demand to meet and you have backward linkages for production, not similar to Sri Lanka. So you have difference of how you feel the growth in that sector has contributed. But listening to Howard, I would probably maybe, if you can also touch on how you guys use technology smartly, perhaps AI, and the export diversification into different markets as well. Over to you, Dipesh.
Roshan, thank you very much. And thank you for providing this platform of knowledge sharing, and also for me in last almost 40 minutes or so has been really a lot of things really eye-opening for me, listening to especially Professor Howard. Didn't think in this perspective while I was deeply listening to him, and I have already written 3 pages of what he was saying. An interesting thing is the small things we are doing in the ground. Good to see that this is feeding in the macro view as well. So altogether, before going into the progression of Bangladeshi FMCG industry in last 10 years or so, I think taking on from what I was just listening from Howard, that utilizing technology in enriching manufacturing is really the key. And I am coming from a very strong manufacturing background. I was working in operational excellence in Japan. I was working in operational excellence in Europe as well before coming back to Bangladesh. One of the key elements this is missing, that which technology we should utilize in our manufacturing to, let's say, reduce wastage, increase productivity, and install the whole value chain concept so that we can really bring more value and provide to the customers. So in terms of I'm leading Grameen Danone in last 5 years, which is let's say in the FMCG landscape of Bangladesh, a very small organization. But what we did, at first we installed ERP system. We started from production floor. So rather than looking into finance, or rather than looking into other perspective, we started really installing enterprise resource planning system in production floor so that we can track where we are bleeding as an organization. And the more we started really finding the value, the more we started being sustainable as an organization. Then we installed technology in the field level in the form of Salesforce automation, and then integrated these two platform so that we have a full view from field, from production floor to field execution. And in our day-to-day operation, we have started utilizing AI, but at first understanding what is our problem and what solution do we need for that problem, and finding out if there is any cheap solution that can give us the scope for optimization in terms of like building the whole value chain of the organization. So that's how we have been working on this. And beyond the scope of Grameen Danone, we have also started utilizing the power of ecosystem, meaning that there are, as Professor Howard was mentioning, he and his son is very much into the diversification of industrialization. So for us, we have found out that there are a lot of unutilized capacities in Bangladesh. So rather than really focusing on building new capacities or capital investment, we started finding out who are the ecosystem players who have those additional capacity, and do they have mindset to, let's say, partnering in that view. So that's how in last two to 3 years, all the new product inclusion that we have in our portfolio, which is focusing on affordable nutrition, fortified products to people, and we are keeping it affordable because we are finding out those partners who can provide us those capacity to produce our product and supply in the market. So that's how, by utilizing technology, cheap technology which we require, it's not like flashy things, and then utilizing the power of ecosystem, we are building in this tough context of these countries. So not only serving Grameen Danone, but also supporting all other ecosystem players as well. Thank you, Roshan.
Excellent, Dipesh. Thank you for that. You mentioned that you've started using AI as well, right?
Right.
And I imagine, as Howard mentioned, it's very much purpose-driven with a specific idea in mind, right? Output. Let's come back to that. So let me turn again to Mr. Mahboob. BIDA is a dynamic organization, and I'm sure BIDA would listen to many of the things that Professor Howard mentioned constructively, having been there many times. That it's full of really dynamic and intelligent people. So going with that, the sentiment, can I ask you, first of all, does Bangladesh or BIDA support innovation of indigenous industries through like a development bank? Some developing economies have this facility where, domestic companies have that support of a seed capital, as was mentioned, through development banks, and or are we in Bangladesh at the moment relying primarily on foreign innovation coming in? And related to that question is, which sectors have been at the forefront of manufacturing, both local and foreign, in terms of sectors and products? Sorry, it's a bit of a double-barreled question, but I'm sure you can handle it. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, I was listening to Dr. Howard and Dipesh. You all are right. I mean, Bangladesh is traveling through a complex road at the moment, and at least one thing is good. I mean, all the advisors of the interim government, I mean, as equal as the ministers, they are working as a team. And we are listening to the governor a few days back. I mean, as you can imagine, I mean, what his strategies are. I mean, he had to fight the monies that were illegally transported out of the country, and also the foreign exchange crunch and the inflation. He had a big set of problems to face. Now, for the first time, he said that the balance of payment has now become positive. But that also means that, I mean, import has reduced, and reduction of import means reduction of exportable products in the future. But for him, or for the central bank, I should say, the big job is now to control the inflation. For Sri Lanka, I think, as Dr. Howard also said, for Sri Lanka, the tourism sector was a very big support. I mean, even if all other industries were not working, but tourism was there. But for Bangladesh, RMG is the only sector, I mean, that we are depending on. We are talking about the diversity for long, but and also the industrialists, the private sector industrialists, and particularly the second generation entrepreneurs who are now leading the companies. They're very innovative, smart, and young entrepreneurs. But our innovation and our efforts have not gone past the RMG. Still, that is the main sector. There were some sectors that had the potentials to become the second largest, but we couldn't do that. That is a very big challenge. So we all know that this is a challenge and we have to face it, but still nothing really has come up until now. Regarding this innovation R&D, I think still now Bangladesh really depends on the innovation that is being imported from other countries. We do not have an R&D lab or other things to that sense. There are some, like in pharmaceuticals, like when the pharmaceutical companies they produce the medicines, they know that, I mean, due to become the LDC, they can produce the medicines, but they only have the medicine, but they don't get the recipe. So they have their R&D lab, and they have to reverse engineer, and they have to find the way how to produce this medicine. So R&D in that industry have really grown up. They're trying to do with that. I think some R&Ds are also there in the agriculture sector, due to fighting the climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. And that is the demand of life. So they are trying to do that. And there are many agricultural varieties that are being developed now. Also, there are different varieties that produce more fruits, bigger in size. I'm not very sure about the taste, but at least since they're producing more with larger quantities, they can feed the huge population. But other than these two, the innovations is a very big, daunting challenge to us. I think to do that, we also need a stronger education system. That is one thing I should say. I mean, we have lots of universities, lots of graduates are coming out, but whether the education is up to the level, up to the mark, whether they will be contributing to develop something or innovate something, that is a huge tax. I mean, for me personally, I think that we have to invest more on education so that they become really interested. You see that sometimes our people, our engineers, our doctors, when they're working outside in other countries, they're doing very good things, doing inventions and discoveries. But in this country, we're not being able to give them that opportunities. So education, although not directly related with the investment, but I think education system is a very good sector that we need to invest to bring the future. The other thing that we're discussing about the sectors, I mean, which sectors are really good in that? I mean, that is also a very interesting thing. I mean, historically, if we see that, I mean, most of our investment has come for power, telecommunication, and other sectors. I mean, if we see the FDI stock, major investments have come in the textile and other sectors. But if we see the previous quarter, I see that the most FDI has come into food processing technologies. That is very interesting. That is because I think the people's income or expenditure capacity is increasing. Now they are in search of good quality food, good quality products. So there a big market of food processing industry is also growing up. As you know that what we produce in agriculture sector here, almost 78% goes without processing. We consume them raw in other cases. Now there are many views on that. People can say that if that a high amount of products is go raw, that means there is a huge loss in storage and other things. But you are also eating very healthy food. When you are eating processed food, the health quality and nutrition quality of that food is actually decreased, although that increases shelf life, but there is an impact on the quality of the food. So there is a mix up here, but I think although for the last quarter food processing was leading the investment, but I think for next couple of quarters, textile should be the one good sector for manufacturing investment, because that is working as a feeder sector for the RMG things. I wanted to talk on other issues that I just forgot. I was trying to focus on Dr. Howard, but when I recall it, I'll come back. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, please interject at any time, any of you. But that was really interesting to listen to, and to say the government's priority was to reduce inflation and import dependence. I think that's similar to Sri Lanka, where they have tried to reduce, and that kind of deflates the economy to some extent. So it's not necessarily a good way to address the trade deficit in terms of welfare economics for the people. But when I was in Dhaka recently, the government had initiated a study group to look at why it is unable to bring inflation under control. And some of the conversations I had with people in industry suggested that it's entirely due to supply side bottlenecks, many of which are politically driven from when the regime changed. Many of the oligopoly owners of certain industries were able to exert pressure or make life difficult. So I'm not sure to what extent that will be resolved soon, but we hope that it will be. Right, turning back to Howard. Some very interesting FDIs coming into agri processing and some into innovation, as outlined by Mr. Mahboob Howard. And but I think the overall story is one of being on the back foot, right? Because being a developing country, you are quite often fighting out several fires than implementing a clear strategy that's well funded. So how would you justify your position that industrialization is the only way to cushion the shocks, external shocks, the volatilities in the international global system of trade that everyone's pretty much, most people, unless you're under sanctions, you are very much affected by everything that goes on. I'm not sure if I agree with Mr. Mahboob saying that Sri Lanka has tourism. As a friend, I think it's a very fragile friend. So over to you, Howard.
Let me just mention this thing about inflation. If you have, let's say, between 5 and 7% depreciation every year, you know, it's impossible to reduce inflation to below that unless you basically go for zero growth, you know. And this is the worry at the moment, that the government is cutting back on imports, or imports are being reduced in a way to get the trade deficit under control and prevent the continuous erosion of the value of the currency. Okay, so this is the problem that they're facing, and they're trying to solve it by doing this. I foresee Sri Lanka doing something very similar going forward. But I wanted to go back to this point about innovation and industrialization. What we have seen, and virtually every study shows, is that it's not education per se that is responsible for innovation, but innovation actually comes out of the manufacturing process. In fact, and that's a very weird statistic, about 85% of all innovation in the advanced countries comes out of manufacturing. Manufacturing accounting for under 20% of GDP, yet between 80 and 85% of all innovation comes from manufacturing. And here's the thing, J.D. Vance said it explicitly. He said, we have actually outsourced innovation when we outsourced manufacturing. You see, so they've been studying this and trying to understand why China is going so far ahead. Not only China, but Southeast Asian countries as a whole. Why are they going so far ahead? Because actually the West has outsourced innovation to these countries when they outsourced manufacturing. And one of the most important conclusions that our historical studies have given us is not simply that innovation is stimulated by manufacturing per se, but it's export-oriented manufacturing. Because if you don't develop cutting edge technology, your products are never going to become competitive. You see, what happened in Latin America is they looked inside because the US and Europe blocked exports to their countries. So the Latin Americans looked internally. And so did the sub-Saharan African countries. So from about 1950 right through till about mid-1980s, that's what happened. We have that as the import substituting period. But here's the problem. Your technology doesn't really become competitive. So the minute you open up your economy, your manufacturers get butchered. And that's what happened to sub-Saharan African country producers, and that's what happened to Latin American country producers. In contrast, countries like Korea and Taiwan and Singapore, from the beginning, they forced their companies to face the world market. And these companies had to innovate to be able to export. Okay, and now the final and most important thing, and the question you asked, which I didn't get an answer to, is all of these countries, without any exception, didn't have just one development bank. They had dozens of them. Okay? Even in agriculture. And that is because innovation has to have government support. The private sector cannot take the risk and support innovation. And that's why development banking has been so important also as a target for advanced countries to demand that they be privatized. Okay, so we know that that happened in Sri Lanka, that one of the conditions of the IMF in the 1990s was that we privatize our development banks, because they know perfectly well that all the successful countries had state-run development banks to bankroll the innovation, to absorb some of the risk. And that's why it's interesting to me to hear the answer to your question. Does Bangladesh have a working proper development bank? We have something called the National Development Bank, which is basically a commercial bank. It doesn't do any development lending whatsoever. But what you need is a whole array. Look at Germany. Everyone talks about German ingenuity and so on. Bullshit. Sorry. Excuse my language. They have one of the largest development banks on the planet. And it started in the 1950s. And all the German engineering companies are bankrolled by them. The whole transition to renewable energy is bankrolled by the state. But then they come to our developing countries and say, oh, no, you mustn't have government involvement. You mustn't have government supporting your manufacturing companies. You see what I mean? It's a game. We know it's a game, but we're in vulnerable positions because we actually have these trade imbalances and debt repayments and so on and so forth. So they can impose on us anything they want. But actually, let's say Bangladesh didn't have any constraints, but was able to support a whole array of its manufacturing companies, especially with regard to absorbing some of the risk of innovation. I can guarantee you Bangladesh will join the ranks of the tiger economies. I guarantee it. I mean, if I saw this actually happening, I would invest some of my own money in Bangladesh. I assure you of that. Because profits growth in those types of countries is much higher than in any other country. But you need to have those structures, and we are being prohibited from having those structures. Sorry, it may not have answered your question exactly.
No,
Roshan,
thank you. And I think there's fund manager in the audience who's going to get in touch with you directly. to invest in Bangladesh? Well, actually, it's a very good question. So, Dipesh, or Mr. Mahboob, does Bangladesh have a proper functioning development bank for supporting innovation and SMEs and large companies?
Mm, no, not really. I mean, the thing that we know about the development banks is not here. We're still doing the traditional banking, the traditional loans and credits to the banks and to the industries, and that is also one obstacle for the industry to grow here because the interest rate. Our governor is a classical economist. He has spent his most of the career in International Monetary Fund, so he's practicing all his knowledge and from the book into controlling the economy. He's not going to reduce the policy rate until the inflation comes down. But I mean, because of that, because he is not bringing the policy rate down, the interest rate for the credits have gone up to 14 to 16%. And with an interest rate of 14 to 16%, it is very difficult for industries to survive in any scenario of the world. This is very difficult. I mean, the credit rate has to come down. So that, I mean, in that perspective, we do not really have a development bank, but what I see that there are some special funds, like there is a special fund for the startups. The startups can take some support or seed money from the central bank fund, and they can try to come up. So it's still on the process, but as a full functioning development bank, no, it's still not there. I think Mr. Dipesh can also highlight on that from his experience.
Thank you. Yes, Dipesh.
I mean, absolutely. And with the support of Mahboob Bhai, we can escalate some of the topics to the government level to some extent. My personal experience is, first of all, there is no development bank in Bangladesh. And the agencies or the institutes who are supporting in developing this ecosystem, the way the screening process is designed, the industry or the people who already are very established and who have a lot of resource, a lot of money, they are getting the support rather than the organizations who are in smaller level and developing the system and addressing the right problems. And then when Mahboob Bhai was talking about seed funds, and if I connect back to the point of Professor Howard, is that most of the seed funds are not really directed to development of manufacturing technologies. So most of the seed funds are going to flashy things and replication of, let's say, technologies from Western world and not really tackling the local problems. So, I mean, this is a road we should take, but I'm sure we are not there. And like from today's discussion and later on as well, I think this is a point that we can escalate to the policymakers in Bangladesh.
Just 1 minute, if you allow me. I mean,
Yes.
continuing with Dr. Howard said, I mean, the relationship between innovation and manufacturing, I think Bangladesh can be a good case study to do a better research on that because we're particularly on RMG and textile, we have more than 50 years of experience, but still all the innovations are here from outside. We're still importing the machineries from China and bringing experts from Pakistan and even from Sri Lanka. So why the innovation didn't happen, despite that they are working on very specific sectors for last 3 or 4 decades? I think that can be a good issue to discuss, do some research on that.
Actually, Mr. Mahboob, you've hit the nail because that's something that we did some research on in Sri Lanka about the impact of free trade zones on multifarious aspects of the economy. One of the strongest ones was the development of townships and communities in areas where formerly there would have been a village evolved into mini townships. It supported the economy, the local economies grew, transport hubs emerged as an area that had a 5,000 population now had 20,000 workers. Around that, training, skills development. Of course, it could have been done better, and there's always room for improvement. So the impacts on real estate, the impacts on human resources, on transport, the list goes on, because I think I didn't know what Howard just said, that 80% of innovation actually came from manufacturing, even if it only accounted for 20 or 30% of the GDP. So that's something really crucially important to bear in mind, I think, that underscores the value of manufacturing beyond what we might see at first hand on paper. It would be great to have a conversation with Bangladesh policymakers, maybe again in the future, with Professor Howard sharing more views. But there are some questions from our audience today. Let me start with the first one. What strategies can Bangladesh or Sri Lanka adopt to stabilize their trade deficits in the face of potential US trade restrictions and or taxation? Sure, the question refers to the waiver of tariffs. Any volunteers to take this one on? Who would like to take this one?
I can say something.
Please, yeah.
When Trump imposed 150% tariffs on China, I happened to be going around in China at that time and giving some guest lectures. And everyone asked me what my view was, because a lot of them were panicking. And I said, actually, before Trump imposed the tariffs, China won the war. Because China is the most powerful industrial country in the world. Whatever China does, the rest of the world follows. Now, China didn't get to where it is by, let's say, producing raw materials or building services or anything. It actually, fought hard to develop its industrial base. Now, I think countries like Bangladesh, like Sri Lanka, other South Asian countries can go down that path and do two things. One is, of course, produce higher value-added goods. Because at the moment, when you're just producing garments and textiles, actually the return to you keeps reducing. Because these are very low value-added products where you have lots and lots of competitors. So you're not going anywhere. So you have to go to higher and higher value-added products, and ideally more and more niche products. But the second thing is, as I said, and this should now have come home very clearly to everyone, is you have to diversify your markets. You have to. This was an accident waiting to happen, and we're very grateful to Donald Trump for this, because we can now say to everyone, you see, you should have diversified your markets. Now, you know that China used to be very dependent on the US. But starting around 2014-15, they quietly started to diversify away from the US. So the US imposing tariffs on China, well, this is the way the Chinese do it. They say, oh, how terrible, and, we are done for, and so on. Bullshit. They knew perfectly well they had won the war. But you don't tell your enemy, I've won the war. Because then they come with new weapons. And China barely scratched. Why? Because it had already developed other markets for its products. And this is the whole point, that we should, it's not just funding manufacturing, but what countries like Korea did? They had these huge trading houses, which were also subsidized by the government. And the job of the trading houses was to find markets, new markets, different markets. and that is also another secret. It's not written in the textbooks. A lot of these things are not there in the textbooks, but these are extremely important if you want to get out of this trap which you're in at the moment, because that noose is going to get tighter and tighter and tighter if you don't start doing something to get out of that trap. And there are many things, as I said, the diversification of the markets, supporting innovation in manufacturing, but also joint ventures. And I just mentioned something with FDI, which you asked earlier, and I didn't properly. I think FDI is okay, but don't rely on foreign technology. Mr. Mahboob said it, and I think it's an important point with regard to the garments. You import your machines from China, and it's Sri Lankans coming and giving your technology and so on. There's a very good case study done of Malaysia and compared to Korea with regard to car manufacturers. The Malaysians relied on FDI for the technology. So their famous Proton car is basically a stripped-down Mitsubishi. But Hyundai got government support to build its car from scratch. In other words, a very different engine, a very different chassis, lots of things which were different. And look at today. Look at the Hyundai. Compare it to Proton car. Hyundai is everywhere. I mean, you go anywhere in Southeast Asia, the taxis are all Hyundai, everybody buys Hyundai, etc., etc. It's a high quality car. But Proton has almost disappeared, except in Malaysia. You see? I think developing indigenous technology is one of the secrets. And government should have been, even if garments and textiles continue in Bangladesh, government should be helping innovation in the sector. I would not advise it. I would say start to go to higher value added products. Don't dump garments and textiles. This is not the point. But, there are these strategies that we can adopt.
Thank you, Howard. So the anonymous attendee who wanted to know what Sri Lanka and Bangladesh can do, Professor Howard's answered that in terms of investing into higher up the value chain. Would you guys like to add anything, Dipesh or Mr. Mohammad? Or there's a couple more questions which I can go through. Okay. How might a U.S. reciprocal tax affect textile and garment exports from Bangladesh to the U.S.? Similar. How would increased tariffs due to U.S. tax impact FDI in Bangladesh? Any takers for that one? Somewhat similar to the earlier question.
I am not an expert in this area at all, but to maybe complement a bit on the previous answer on how to tackle all these challenges, I think also coming back to one of the insight from one of the panelists was that restricting import is not the answer. But at the same time, I think there is a bit of gray area as maybe total restriction is not the answer, but it could be very well selected to stop the drainage of foreign currency, and which is imbalancing the balance of payment and the trade balance, I think. So in our company, what we did in last 3 to 4 years, constrained by COVID, constrained by Ukraine war, we have really focused on local sourcing and decentralizing the supply chain. So there is a concept called social procurement, meaning that we have started really working with our suppliers and started working on their key raw materials as well. So rather than having a very specific specification for the inputs that we have in our factory, we started really tweaking it. We started looking into what alternative we locally have. So the community we have started engaging. So more people being a part of Grameen Danone supply chain, they started having their own income source, and we have reduced our import dependency quite significantly. For example, at one point of time, we had to import almost 75% of the material that we use, but now we import less than 20% material that we use for our finished product. So I think this could be a key that to develop our ecosystem, we just don't always have to look outside of the country. Within the country, we can really strongly engage all the ecosystem partner that the whole like community started really growing. So I just wanted to add into that. And regarding garments and other topic, I have no experience at all, so don't want to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dipesh. There's one more question here, which is, any thoughts about the future interest rate regime of Bangladesh, the repo rates in particular? I think Mr. Mahboob would be the authority for this one, perhaps. Any thoughts about future interest rates? Yeah.
I decide on the interest rate, so I cannot say that. But as I've told during my discussion, is that, I mean, the central bank is really depending on this, I mean, restricting the money supply, crunching, so that to control to tame the inflation. So, I mean, they have declared the money policy, I think 2 or 3 days back, and still the repo rate is around 10%. So I think unless the inflation comes down to say 7 or 8%, I think there is very little chance that this repo rate will come down, because I think the central bank is also out of armament. They do not have much other things to employ, so they have to follow this, and they will follow this restricted money supply policy. So I think for next 6 months, I don't see any possibility for the policy rate to come down. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think. Thank you, so I think this have a stifling effect on economic growth and activity, of course. And I think Howard has mentioned this with respect to Sri Lanka, how the authorities responded with the wrong policy measure to deal with inflation, which didn't help, and particularly hit hard on SMEs who are unprotected, had very high non-performing loan ratios, and then they introduced a per rata rights execution where many of the SMEs lost properties which they were using as collateral for their operations, which then triggered onto an impact on the property market, which for the first time in 20 plus years that our unit has been monitoring the land economy in Sri Lanka, we saw a dip in prices, which is very strange for a island economy, and that was due to a series of policy measures, as Howard has dissected it for what it is. Right, I would think in the interest of time, we can have like a 2 to 3 minute wrap up from each of our experts, perhaps focusing on, I think, looking at the range of questions that are coming from our audience, and of course, what's happening around us. You may touch on the geopolitical angle of where we are in the world and how that might affect us moving forward. So, how do you see the progress of Bangladesh in particular? For Howard, he can talk about Asia as a whole. We let him off the hook on that one. Over to you then, sir. Howard, over to you first.
Just a comment. on what Mr. Mahboob said about inflation and interest rate is we have probably governors that are calling each other every day and talking to each other because they are repeating the same sort of nonsense, I'm sorry to say, about money supply and inflation. I don't think they have been reading any modern text. In fact, I'm sure of it. Because even the IMF and the Western central banks have now said inflation has nothing to do with money supply. The most recent is 2021, the Federal Reserve Chair admitted to the US Senate that inflation had nothing to do with printing money because they just undertook the greatest ever experiment of printing money in the history of modern economies, and inflation actually kept falling over 12 years. So they had to admit that that was nonsense. Yet, when the IMF comes to Sri Lanka or goes to Bangladesh or goes anywhere, they tell their friends in the central bank, keep going with this story about inflation and money supply. You know, this is simply nonsense, but it's there to keep the economy down. It's there to justify high interest rates. But the good story for you, Mr. Mahmood, is that our governor, because he realizes what a destructive impact the high interest rates have been, he's now finding all sorts of mechanisms to actually inject liquidity into the system and saying, no, that's not an increase in the money supply. Okay, so he's managed to bring down interest rates with all sorts of weird mechanisms, okay, and justify them. He said, no, that's not money supply. This is not money supply. That's because the business community have had enough. And they put pressure and said, you better bring these rates down. And I suspect at a certain point, the Bangladeshi business community will probably do the same thing. You know, so there may be a light at the end of the tunnel that we're not seeing yet. I mean, I don't think it's going to do very much. I don't believe that interest rates per se actually will turn an economy around, bringing them down. But it's already some relief anyway. But I just had one other comment, Roshan, which I think is something that should be kept in mind, is in Bangladesh, like in India and like in Sri Lanka, over the last 20 years, real interest rates have fallen, real wage rates, that is the nominal wage minus the rate of inflation, has actually been either near zero or negative. And I think this is the cause of a lot of social unrest. If you compare it with Vietnam and China, both of them have very good growth in real wages. Real wages have kept pace with real per capita GDP growth in both those economies, whereas Bangladesh, it's only 2% average growth compared with 7% real per capita GDP growth. Okay, and that's asking for trouble. Now, you're marginally better than India, which has actually had negative real wage growth compared to something like 10% increase in real per capita growth. Okay, but this is a fuse that is waiting to be lit again, unless the government recognizes it and tries to do something about that.
Thank you, Howard. Concerns about the labor market, unemployment, skills actually was right at the top of our list of surveys in our industrial leaders survey in Bangladesh. By contrast, in a place like Sri Lanka, it was more about what's happening in the world and global markets and things, where I think Bangladesh is an economy that's far more self-reliant and self-sufficient in many ways. Dipesh, how would you summarize the way forward?
Few key interesting things. As you have mentioned, that Bangladeshi economy is much more self-sufficient than many other, and the proof was during the pandemic. We are not affected as like many other countries of the world. We could somehow survive and sustain during that period of time. One of the key points that how Bangladesh perceived to proceed is underlying in the analysis that we have seen from RI unit in the graphs that we have seen. Like right now, in terms of savings, in percentage of GDP has increased and people's expenditure has decreased. The reason is the whole economy is going through a bit of inertia, and people, let's say, in terms of investment, in terms of really expanding the businesses, have taken a bit of position to hold a bit rather than going like to the path of going forward, rather than it slowed down. I think that's the key factor, that the more the economy will start rolling, the more the growth will be there. So all the factors of let's say slow growth and the relative relation of the inflation and also people's wage increase all together, the country is going through a huge transformation. And it needed a bit of stability, which I think we have started seeing in last few months or so. So going forward through very carefully taken steps, I think we can still overcome this crisis and go forward like Sri Lanka is doing right now. I mean, from a third person view, that's what I feel. Thank you.
Excellent, Dipesh. Thank you. And over to you, Mr. Mahboob.
Thank you. I mean, away from narrow areas of manufacturing and investment, if we take a view on the wider issue, I mean, last month I was in Spain in the Financing for Development Summit. So IMF Vice President or DMD or whatever they call it, he was there, he was speaking. And he was saying that we sometimes go to many countries, gives a set of recommendations. People funnily call them prescriptions and make a very strong criticize of ours. But what we feel that every country has to increase the strength or soundness of their economy. That's a must. Every country has to do that. I also feel so. I mean, Bangladesh needs to work on the internal strength and soundness of economy, particularly if we look at the percentage of our GDP. I mean, what we earn as a direct tax or direct revenue, that is almost similar, almost same to our revenue or recurrent expenditures. So that means that we are left with very small amount of money for the development activities or investing in other areas, be it education, health, or other sectors. So I think there are many areas to work on. We have to increase our direct taxes. We have to increase our tax net. We have to do some strict regulations on banking policy and regulations. So there are many ways. I am sure that our policymakers, including the governor and several, they know about it. So I wish that government takes and people who listens to them, they also comply with the directive so that the economy gets a bit more stronger and sounder. That's all from mine. Let me take this opportunity to thank you all for this excellent opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Howard. It was excellent listening to you. And Dipesh, if you're in Dhaka, always welcome for a tea at my office. And thank you, Daryl, Roshan, and others who have organized this thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mahboob. Before we all go, maybe if I may add my 2 cents worth, I think one of the things that, to answer the audience questions, and I'm very sorry for many of you who sent a question, but we run out of time. I think there's a future of trade blocks and regional cooperation, underutilized organizations like SARC and BIMSTEC, where there's, Global South cooperation should be probably utilized more. And And it was very exciting listening to some of the ideas coming from you, especially the one that I'm excited about is the agribusiness, where it's an opportunity where Asia and South Asia can obviously utilize comparative advantages in agriculture with technology, maybe use AI to leapfrog in food processing and production. I think that could be one to watch in the region. It is supposed to be the Asian century. South Asia was, I think, might still be the fastest growing part of the world. So it's not all doom and gloom, right? But I think if we are careful of how we tread the path, I mean, everyone seems to agree on what needs to be done, but there's a lot of debate on how it should be done and who to trust when they tell you how it's done. So keeping those things in mind, I believe the future is bright for Bangladesh and the region as a whole. And I'm being an optimist. So once again, thank you to the expert panel. Wonderful listening to all of you, Howard, Mahboob, and Dipesh, as always. And look forward to seeing you guys in Dhaka as well. I hope I will also get a cup of tea if I drop by with Howard.
Yes, yes, of course. Please do come.
And thank you to Team RIU putting together a report, which I think is really good. Thank you for you guys in the audience, and please do get a copy and give us your feedback on the report. And thanks a lot for everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.